When we really care about a project, of course we want it to be good. And that goes double for your memoir. Not only are you putting your story out there for readers, you're also putting your writing ability out there. And that can be really scary. Now, you probably know that most books will sink or swim based on the quality of revisions. And that's why today I want to continue our 4-part revision series by talking about what it is that makes a good memoir. Stay tuned. You've got the story, you've got the idea. You just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist. Welcome back to our 4-part series on revising your memoir. In this second part in our ongoing series, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of revising, and namely that is to make sure your memoir is good. Unfortunately, good is of course subjective, and no one can ever give you a 100% guarantee that your memoir will be good, but there are of course some pieces that we can make sure are in place as you are revising to give your book the best shot at being good and maybe even great. But before we get to those 4 things that you can look for, I do want to just make a little bit of a caveat here. Now, one thing that I have seen pretty often as a book coach and a ghostwriter is that oftentimes folks are really nervous to even start on a book if they don't think it will be good. And the reason that I want to get into this is that I think it gets at a pretty fundamental misunderstanding of what makes a book good. Now, I think a lot of this comes from this kind of world we live in where we expect to be entertained with kind of high-speed chases all the time. Everything is supposed to be exciting and short and get straight to the point and be so engaging that we're glued usually to our phones, but sometimes the television, by a story of some kind. Now, of course, we all hope that our books will become bestsellers, that they will be on the bedside tables of everybody in America. But the truth is that most of the time, the most powerful books are not books based on the wildest stories. Most of the time, the books that really reach people and touch them and move them to live their lives differently are that way, not because the story is so exciting, but because the way the story is told resonates with readers, it engages their curiosity, and it prompts them to tell their friends about the story. Now, of course, this can be a result of the story being so exciting, but the reason that I want to point out that that's very often not the case is that I will sometimes find that people want to know whether their book's going to be good before they even start. They want to tell the story, have someone listen to it and say, yes, that is a bestseller book, or no, that is not a bestseller book. I want to just tell you straight up, no one can do this for you. There is no story that someone will be able to listen to and tell you with any level of certainty, whether written up as a book, it will be engaging for readers. No one can tell you that. And the reason I wanted to make sure I said that before we get into the bulk of the video here is that I recently heard from someone who had reached out to kind of an editing support company. It was not Page and Podium, but a kind of a similar company that works with authors. And they were really trying to sell her on this kind of big ticket editing package. And one thing that she said to me as she was kind of telling me about this experience is she said, they told me from the title alone, they knew it would be a bestseller. And that was when I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that that is a scam company. No one can tell you that your book will be successful in any way, whether as an enjoyable read for most people or as something that sells a lot of copies based on just the idea or the title. The same idea can unfortunately be told in a great way or a not good way, and titles are the same thing. They don't really tell us much about what the actual book will be and how enjoyable it will be to read. But I understand the impulse here because it is really difficult to think about the prospect of setting out on this long journey, often 9 months or longer, just of drafting when you're really not sure what the outcome will be. You're really not sure whether it is even something that is worth doing. Now, if you're struggling with this, I want you to go back about a month on this YouTube channel, podcast, or blog, because I talked about what makes your memoir worth writing, and I think that's going to be really informative for you. But what I want to mention today is that this kind of pressure for something to be really good can sometimes oddly intensify as we continue to write. And when we are in this revision stage, there often is a lot of pressure to identify whether the book is inherently good, but there is also pressure to make it good if it's not already. And what I see happen so often to authors is that as they get into the revision stage, when they should be trusting themselves to have begun to master the craft of memoir, what I find is they often start to tell themselves that they have no idea whether it's good. And what happens here is that we are eroding our self-trust. So that is why for this video, I wanted to give you 4 really, really simple things that you can go through as almost a checklist for each part of your book and primarily your book as a whole, just to reassure yourself that you do have the building blocks in place that make any memoir good, even great. So before we get into that, let me just give a little plug. Stay tuned, please. I'm going to get to this in just about 30 seconds. But one thing that I do want to let you know is that we've really recently opened up our group program, the Memoir Method, to invite with open arms all of you authors that have either a partial or a full first draft of your memoir. Now, we have always worked with people that came in with first drafts, but what we wanted to do with the Memoir Method in this kind of new season was to go in and really make sure that folks who want to use that program to revise their work feel just as supported as those who want to use the program to go from idea to published. So we've built out quite a lot in this program just to make sure that you'll feel really, really supported. And if, as I'm going through these 4 points, you feel like it would be really helpful to have a little bit more direct support, someone to ask questions to, someone to kind of pose the specific contexts of the questions that come up in your particular book, I really hope that you will consider joining us in that program. If you're interested, you can head over to pageandpodium.com/memoir-method. Or if you're ready to book a call with me and make sure that you are a great fit for this program, you can do that at pageandpodium.com/contact. Okay, so that out of the way, let's get into today's main events. What are the 4 things that make a memoir, or honestly, almost any book, a good book? Okay, so the first one is that any good memoir is going to have a cohesive point. Now, when we think about memoir, oftentimes people kind of assume that the main point of their memoir will just be them. And that, of course, does make sense. When you are writing a memoir, you are writing your story. So yes, of course. But I want to go a little bit deeper than this because one of the things that I have found through running our group program and working one-on-one with memoir coaching clients is that there is often some muddiness when it comes to actually defining the purpose of the book. So one of the ways that we really help people get through this in the program is to divide out your key message from your core topic. And I want to talk kind of briefly about what each of these are, and then I want to talk about how important it is in revision to have those things in mind. So first of all, when we talk about your core topic, we are not talking about just you, and we're not even really talking about your life. As you all know, if you are out there reading memoirs, which I hope you are if you're writing one, many times memoirists will write multiple memoirs for their same life experience. Now, the only way that this can be true is because good memoirs are not your whole life story. We might classify that as an autobiography, but even then, I just want to extend a word of caution. If you are trying to make your memoir be saleable and marketable for people other than your family, we are almost always going to lean into a pretty narrow topic. So when you come up with a core topic, what is that going to sound like? This might be something like the time period where I adopted my second child. Or this might be something like the time period when I was getting started in my new career and really struggling with X and Y and Z things in the workplace. This might be meeting a partner. This might be surviving some kind of a disease or malady. This might be really any range of issues, and here's the key, that you can define in one sentence. The way to know that you are off track on your core topic is that your book will not be about one thing, about the process of going through one thing. It will rather start to be a little bit like a list of items in your life. So oftentimes when I'm talking with people, particularly those who are concerned that the story won't be good enough for the book to be good, I find that there is such a temptation to, rather than trust that your story is good enough and build out the structure of that story in a way that serves it, instead, folks will really want to kind of pile on all of the traumas of their life. So for instance, I might start by saying, this book is about adopting my second child. But then if I feel like that's not going to be compelling enough, if I feel like, who am I to talk about this topic? If I feel like, oh, there's so many books on this already, what I might be tempted to do is say, and I also really want to make sure that I talk about this car accident that I was in as a kid because it was so scary. And then I also had, a run-in with this particular disease that I had when I was a teenager, and that might be really interesting. So maybe we should put some of that in there too. And my parents got divorced when I was a kid, and so that might be something we need to talk about. And I think you can see where I'm going here, right? When we start to build out our core topic with all of these other things, we're trying to make the book more exciting, but what we actually do is make the book much more confusing. So remember that a key to a good book is a cohesive story. And that's why when you are working on a memoir, you really want to pick just one incident. Now, I have good news. If you are watching this and you have put together a draft and you feel like, oh my gosh, I did that. That describes me. I put extra stuff into my book. I want to tell you that there's really good news here because oftentimes first drafts need a lot of revision anyway. And we talked about that last week with the chaos house, right? It is very possible that you have a lot of material in there. And yes, some of it maybe went a little bit off track in terms of your core topic. That happens to literally everyone, by the way, but a lot of it is going to be really, really good material. So as you are kind of thinking through how to make sure that topic is really cohesive, I really want you to let go of this draft that you have started to put together or that you have completely put together. Let go of what it is, because if you can really narrow in that topic, you will do you, your project, and your readers such a service. It is so important. It will serve your book so, so well. Now, the second half of this kind of first point is that I also want you to think about your key message. Now, we have a whole video on developing your key message, so you can find that either on YouTube, on our podcast, or on our blog. And the title of that will be, Do You Know Your Memoir's Message? Because I find that so many people just simply do not know their memoir's message. Now, what do I mean when I say message? Your message of your memoir is just the thing that you want people to learn by reading your story. Now, sometimes people will object a little bit to defining this as separate from the story because they think what I'm saying is you need to be preachy, that you need to beat people over the head with your message. No, I am absolutely not saying that. But what I am saying is there should be one consistent lesson that we see you learn or that you teach over the course of your story. So when we define that, again, I really want to encourage you to define it in terms of just one sentence. What is the one thing that you want people to walk away from your book knowing? Now, again, check out that other video. I go into a lot of detail and depth on what types of messages these might be, but I do want to add a little note here, and that is to say, sometimes when we get into the revision stage, we start to be so much more critical of ourselves. And if that is you, I want to give you a little word of caution. As you are thinking about that message, I really want you to resist the urge to think that you have to be the only one that's ever said it. In fact, many really successful memoirs, many memoirs that have changed millions of people's lives, were based on a very, very simple message. Often these are messages about identity. They might be messages about love, existing in the world, believing in yourself. I know when we talk about these things, they can seem cliche, but when you pair it with a unique and carefully selected story that is one slice of your life, what you are doing is making a message that is large enough to invite other people in with you, more unique by putting it through the lens of a story that only you can tell. So, if you find yourself looking and thinking about what is your message and you are really feeling critical of yourself because you don't think it's unique enough, I really want you to step back and just make super, super sure that that is not your inner critic running away with you. It is very, very possible to have a pretty broad message that still communicates so powerfully when it is paired with a core topic, a really clearly defined slice of your life. Okay, so every book that is a good book is going to have at least one of these. For memoirs, we across the board recommend that you have both. But fiction might mostly focus on just the core topic, on just the story. General nonfiction, prescriptive nonfiction, self-help, leadership, that kind of thing might focus more on just having a cohesive key message. With memoir, we probably need both, and we want them to fit together. So if this is something you'd like help with, we do workshop these in our group program, the Memoir Method. So let me know and we can hop you in there so that you can get a little bit of feedback as you are revising. But the main thing is, if you can articulate what those two things are, and you can point to your draft and say, yes, consistently, every single important moment of this book points you to the core topic and the key message, you are right on track, right where you should be. Okay, after you have made sure that you've got that core topic and that key message, the second thing that I want you to think about is that your book engages your reader's curiosity. Now, I know this seems pretty obvious, but I want to talk about it in part because it is obvious. When we are thinking about memoir, one of the things that I like to talk about a lot is the difference between truth and fact. And we will often say in memoir, and actually any narrative nonfiction, that the truth is more important than the facts. Now, I again have a whole video on this, so you can scroll back actually about a year now to find that truth versus facts in memoir video or podcast episode. But what I want to say for now is that when we are thinking about truth versus facts, all we mean is that we are going to avoid being overly focused on the specific detail and instead focus on the broader truth. Now, I like to call this an umbrella of truth because if we think about being out in the world and feeling like we are just bombarded with so much pressure and so many expectations, so many ideas, oftentimes it just feels like rain is just pouring down on us, right? And one of the magical things about memoir is that we are allowing people to come under an umbrella with us to say, hey, I know all that stuff that's going on is so stressful and overwhelming, but what if we just focus on one specific issue? What if we look at just this one thing in life? And what if we kind of find our common ground and together figure out how to overcome that? That's the most powerful memoir, right? That is a great memoir. And the way that happens is not by focusing on the specific dates and details, but rather on using truth, using shared truth from our culture, from our society, from being a human, to invite other people to relate to us. And when we talk about engaging reader curiosity, we are very, very often looking at telling the truth in a way that feels really, really relatable to your reader. Now, I want to bring back in the point that I made earlier about how a lot of times folks will think it is the story being exciting and over the top that brings a reader in. Now, I am sure that I have too, have read books that had over-the-top stories. I have read memoirs that I was just shocked by the time I put it down. And that is engaging. That is true. But the memoirs, the books that have really stuck with me, the memoirs that really speak to my soul, it's not that the story is so wild and exciting. And in fact, it's that the story was so relatable to me. So even if I hadn't and wasn't living the life that the author had lived, I maybe knew someone that had a similar experience, and it really helped me kind of feel closer to them by coming underneath this umbrella with the author and just kind of sharing a little moment of focusing on this one particular idea. And the reason I wanted to kind of bring up this idea of kind of, is your story interesting enough, is that it is oftentimes not the story that's going to engage your reader. It is oftentimes the shared sense of humanity. So as you are thinking about, is this going to engage your reader? Is your reader going to be curious? I want you to think not about how you can kind of step up the drama of your life, of the things that happened. Instead, I want you to think about what kinds of unique observations did you make? Were there things that, because of other contextual things in your life, maybe took you a little bit longer to come to this particular lesson? Or maybe it was like a bolt of lightning. Maybe you immediately knew what you needed to talk about and what you needed to do, but the struggle to get there was really hard. Or maybe you were held back by some factors that were outside of your control, so you had to keep pushing. All of these story pieces, all of these things that you went through, these are all points of curiosity for your reader, not because they're big and dramatic, but because they're an interesting way to approach a particular topic. And that's really what I meant earlier when I was talking about how your key message does not have to be the most original, unique message in the world. The reason is it is the intersection between your story and your message that is much more likely to grab your reader's attention than any particulars of either your message or your story. Okay, so as you're kind of thinking about how are you engaging the reader's curiosity, I want you to really think about if you're being vulnerable, if you're being clear, if you are really sharing the places that you struggled, because oftentimes the places where we didn't get it right are the things that engage the most curiosity, the most connection, the most relatability. So let's really make sure as you are making these revisions that you are leaning into the things that engage that kind of curiosity. And if you are tempted to dial up the drama just for the sake of drama, really kind of go back to that first point and make sure that you are staying on track with your core topic and your key message. That's going to be the most important thing that you can do here. Okay, and the third thing that makes a memoir good is that the pace consistently moves forward through conflict and change. Now, this is something that you can pretty easily identify in a reverse outline. And again, to point you to yet another video, we have a pretty in-depth video on how to do a reverse outline. So you can scroll back through, we'll put the link in the show notes, but also you can scroll back through and find the video on how to start revising your book. That's going to talk you through that reverse outline stage. But as you're going back through your draft, you do want to look for whether the pace is working. And I will say this, oftentimes people get a little bit confused between the two ways that pace works. So one of the ways that pace works is that when we write shorter sentences, the movement tends to feel a little bit faster. When we write kind of long, drawn out sentences, that will often give a kind of a more peaceful, slower feeling. And this is the reason that it is very, very important that you are varying the sentence structures in your book so that the pace kind of feels like it's moving. But that is not what we're talking about here. If you remember from our first revision video, when we think about the process of revising, we are not doing things as simple and close up as changing a sentence from short to long or long to short. Rather, what we are doing is making sure that the structure is shored up. And that is the second way that pace is going to play out in your book. So as opposed to this kind of surface level approach where your sentences move your book forward, when we're thinking about our structure moving our book forward, we're looking for two things, conflict and change. So first, conflict. Now, I know if you dig back in your memory from probably high school, maybe junior high English class, you will have heard about the different types of conflict. So these are often person versus person, person versus self, person versus nature. Sometimes then there's person versus social context and things like that as well. That is exactly what we're talking about here. And friends, it's that simple. So when you are thinking about looking back through your draft, what I want you to ask yourself is, do we have conflict running throughout? So in every single chapter, there should be one of those points of conflict. Now, one of the things that I do find that people get a little bit wrong about this is that when they think of conflict, they are just literally thinking of person versus person. And the reason I want to point this out is because for memoir, it is crucially important that you understand that person versus self can be just as dramatic, if not more so, than person versus person. When we are reading a memoir, we want to see that character, that person, you, grappling with some of the things that they're trying to learn, right? Because that's real life. None of us get handed a lesson and suddenly know how to handle everything in our life differently from that point forward, right? What happens is we get this lesson and then we maybe don't really like it, or we get the message and we're really not sure how we're supposed to act differently, or we get the message and we completely misunderstand it. And that is the meat of a memoir. The grappling with the message, the grappling with what comes next and what's the right move and what's going to be the most beneficial thing for you. That is the conflict at the heart of a memoir. So yes, you will have these other types of conflicts as well, but I do want to point out, do not discount your person versus self. There very likely might be a point in your memoir, there's probably more than one actually, where you have the message, you know what you should be doing, or you're trying to do the thing that you think is right, but there's something inside of you that is just not letting you do it. Oh my gosh, it can be so frustrating, right? And if you can capture that, that will be so powerful to use this conflict to drive forward your pacing. Okay, besides conflict, the second thing that is really going to keep your pacing on track is change. Now, these go so closely together when we're talking about memoir because, of course, as I was just saying with person versus self, the whole point of a memoir is that we had some kind of a transformation, right? That internal transformation is really what people want to read when they read your book. And very often, that conflict is actually spitting out change. So that as we are moving forward with these conflicts, whatever type it might be, we are making kind of little baby steps forward, those lurching, scary baby steps forward into figuring out what the eventual transformation will be, what that message is that we want to share with people. And one thing that should be very, very clear is that at the different segments of your memoir, I like to break this into 4 equal pieces, but some people will do 3, however you're looking at it. But as you move through the larger structure, the zoomed out structure of your book, we should see you changing your strategy. Now, this can be difficult to do because oftentimes people don't want to kind of pat themselves on the back, like, oh, I learned it all, I transformed, I'm amazing. And oftentimes we don't want to admit how wrong we were in the beginning, but your reader needs that. Your reader needs to see you transforming through that conflict. So again, as you're doing this reverse outline, you are not only looking for the conflict, but I also want you to look for what happens at the end of the conflict. Is there then a point in which you are changed? Is there a different approach that we see from you because you're living these particular moments in your memoir? If you've got both of those, your pacing should feel really, really good to your readers. And that is, of course, the thing that keeps them reading. Okay, and the fourth and final, and I saved this for last because I bet y'all were anticipating it being the first. Sneaky like that. The last one is that a good memoir has clear and consistent writing. That's all. So I want to talk a little more about this because, again, I find that people get much too focused on the quality of the prose level writing, meaning the sentences, the word choice, that kind of thing, and ignore the structural stuff that is, as you saw, 3/4 of a good book, and actually maybe even more in practice. So what do we mean by clear and consistent writing? Because we are wording this very, very specifically. Whereas I find that people will typically have some kind of voice in mind that they think of as good writing. And almost across the board, especially for high achieving women, what they're looking for is kind of longer sentences, beautiful flowing prose, kind of poetic expression, all those kinds of lovely, lovely things. But also sometimes people come in and say, I really don't like those kind of $1 million words. I would really rather have my writing be pretty simple and clear. And what I want to tell you is, those are both right. Either of those approaches can be clear and consistent. The key is that, and hear me say this, throughout the book, you are true to your voice. So I've had conversations in the past with clients, and there was kind of a period where I really was hearing a lot of comments about this, where folks were really concerned that their prose was not good enough. And one of the things that really made me realize was that a lot of times when we think of good writing, we're kind of reverse engineering it, right? We are looking at someone's final published book, and often we are comparing that to our first draft. Of course, a final polished published book is going to be clearer and more consistent than a first draft every single time across the board. And the reason is a final published book has always been revised and it has always been edited, usually by multiple people. And the reason that I want to point that out is that oftentimes with your clear and consistent writing, as long as you are true to what feels authentic to you, you will get so much help from the editors you hire along the way. That doesn't let you off the hook completely, of course. You still do need to, again, make sure that you are consistently tuning into that voice that feels right to you. And you'll go through the whole manuscript and then revise to make sure you have that consistency. But there's not nearly as much pressure as I bet you think there is on making sure that your writing is beautiful. That, in fact, is not only less important than structural concerns, it's also something that you're probably not going to be able to see in your own writing. You just won't. We're too close to it. And especially if you're someone that is really worried about the kind of prose and the format and the poetry of your writing, 9 times out of 10, you are going to be so much harder on yourself than any reader would ever be. And really what you probably need, it's just a copy editor. Just tighten things up a little bit and give it that punch. Okay, so as you are going through and revising that draft, I really want you to keep in mind that oftentimes it is large-scale structural things that your reader will not even notice that make it a good book. And in fact, when we bake all of these things into our structure, either from the beginning before we start writing, or when we come back to that final draft, what we have done is created a book that your reader can really connect to. And that is the entire purpose of a book being good, right? Is that our reader likes it and recommends it to their friends and family. The bottom line is this: a good book is a book that earns the reader's trust and helps shepherd them through the entire book to the end. No book is going to be able to do this for every reader. No book. But if you have those 4 considerations that I've gone over today, you will find an audience. People will be drawn to your work. So I know it's easier said than done, but trust me, all it takes is some time, consideration, patience, practice, and often some strategically timed pieces of feedback. So if I can be the one to help give you that feedback and help move you through this process, I hope that you will reach out. Both Emily and I would love to have you in the Memoir Method group program, either to start your memoir and be sure all the way through that you are hitting the points you need to hit, or to use your first draft and revise it into a really solid memoir that I know you will be so proud of and that your readers will love. So please reach out if you'd like to be involved in that program. We'd love to have you. And in the meantime, please make sure that you rate, subscribe, like, and share, because of course you are not going to miss the 3rd installment of our revision series when it's time to get feedback, and also when it's not. Okay, until then, I hope that you have such an enjoyable time digging back into that revision document. I will see you soon. Happy writing and happy revising. You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.